Fighting against injustice across Connecticut, Melissa in the Morning checks in with the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities on WICC 600.
Good morning. Mike Roberts is here with the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing well, Melissa. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for asking. We're so excited to have you back on the show this morning. And according to my notes this morning, we are going to be chatting about fair chance legislation. What does that mean?
That refers to legislation that's been passing in different states around the country, including Connecticut, and at the national level to address the ways that employers can use criminal conviction history in denying folks employment, and other kinds of providers, housing providers, other places can use that information as a means of turning people down for opportunities.
Interesting. Now, I know here in our listening area, Bridgeport Mayor Joe Ganim is one of the biggest advocates, depending on the crime, of course. He certainly isn't sitting here going, yeah, let's put murderers back on the street. But he is saying, if you've had prior convictions and you can turn your life around, that there is a way to be a great member of society. And he uses himself as an example from his criminal record and now turning around and being mayor of Bridgeport yet again. What is the current standing here in Connecticut? How do employers need to proceed if they get an application from someone who has a past conviction?
Yeah, right now, Connecticut has what's called a ban the box provision that passed a few years ago, and that prohibits most employers from being able to request criminal record information, criminal conviction information as part of the initial application process. But there was a bill passed in the last legislative session that will take effect a year from now, next January, that will kind of expand the scope of that. It creates a new kind of process for getting certain old criminal records erased, and then prohibiting employers from discriminating on the basis of that erased criminal history information. And then Connecticut also has a lot of defense contractors, other kind of federal contractors, and as of last month, December, for the work that's related to those federal contracts, there are certain requirements now that have similar goals of prohibiting the folks that are being considered for that work to be barred based on their criminal record. Again, subject to certain exceptions, but the general gist is to give folks a chance to be able to get these opportunities and not let a criminal conviction be an automatic bar to that.
Mike Roberts is here. So can you just clarify for us, Mike, because sometimes people will hear this and, for fair reason, they'll say, are you kidding me? What do you mean somebody commits a horrible felony and you expect for them to just, be rehired? Can you talk about, first of all, when we say prior convictions, what are we talking about? I mean, are we talking about, people who have committed mass murders and have been convicted? Like, are we talking about, drug dealing? Are we talking about theft? Like, what are we talking about? Or does it run the gamut?
It kind of runs the gamut, but it's not every single conviction. For the law that's taking effect next year, we're specifically talking about erased criminal records, and that only applies to certain kinds of convictions. Only certain convictions are eligible for that kind of erasure. So, for example, certain kinds of family violence crimes are not eligible. Certain sexual offenses or sexually violent offenses are currently not eligible. But for example, something like somebody was convicted of a misdemeanor when they were under 18, and it's been, maybe close to 20 years. That might be an instance that we're talking about. And then as well, for the state and the federal government as well, there are certain instances where employers are still going to have to consider that. At the federal level, for example, there are some instances where by law the employer is required to consider criminal history, or there's certain national security positions that needs to apply to. And so this isn't completely eliminating the requirement for all convictions and for all positions, but it certainly will hopefully expand the opportunities to more positions than are currently available.
In your professional opinion, Mike Roberts with the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, how many people get passed up? Like, how many people are we missing out on, especially when you talk about right now during COVID with so many shortages and so many open positions? How many people get passed up because of their past criminal records, do you think?
I think a fair amount. I don't have the specific numbers, but just anecdotally, it's a fair number of people. For a long time, it was pretty regular to see on applications any questions about previous conviction, even previous arrest, even if it didn't result in a conviction, just asking about have you ever been arrested for something. And that an arrest in and of itself does not equal being convicted of a crime. But even that was being used against folks, and it's a lot of folks that may fall into that, who have not even been convicted but are already being barred from these opportunities. And so, keeping in mind the idea that innocence until proven guilty, and then the idea that if you're sentenced to a crime, that's what your sentence is. That's not shouldn't be coupled with a life sentence of not being able to find housing or work or being admitted to certain other opportunities. All of that general idea goes into these fair chance laws, as the name suggests. It's giving people a chance once they have served a sentence to be able to come back out into the community and be able to put their name in the hat for opportunities and be considered just based on their merits alone.
And Mike, my last question is, are there protections in place, though, for employers who hire people? For example, let's say it's somebody who, was a drug dealer, for example, and they've been clean and they haven't been into it. But, let's say an employer takes somebody on and overlooks that, which is perfectly fine. And that's sort of the point of this legislation. But then that person does end up getting in with the wrong crowd, goes back to doing what they're doing. Are there any protections in place for the employer who does, put their business on the line to give people another chance? I totally understand what you're saying, but on the other side of things, why employers are so nervous about it is, what if someone relapses, for example?
Right. Yeah, it's going to depend on the opportunity, but certainly kind of some of the provisions that are being talked about now that we've talked about today are for previous criminal records. So if somebody reoffends and there's a new issue, a new conviction, then some of these provisions won't apply. That can still be taken into account in the employer's decision making. It's not to say that with this that then if somebody does engage in a criminal offense, either reoffending or just offending for the first time, that the employer is totally prohibited from taking action on that basis. It's really just a matter these new bills in particular are focused on where somebody has served their time, served their sentence, and is looking to get back out into the community, that some of that previous history might not be used against them, depending on the circumstances. But if it happens again, or if it happens for the first time coming up, some of those provisions aren't going to apply to that.
Mike Roberts with the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. We always love checking in with you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Anytime, Melissa.
All right. Again, that's Mike Roberts with the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities here on WICC.